A soft clapping began, hesitant at first, then growing steadily. One person started, then another, until the room was filled with applause. It wasn't loud or forced. It was genuine from the heart. The sound of hands meeting hands echoed off the walls, a warm reminder that talent and passion can move people deeply, even in the most ordinary of settings. The man smiled faintly, humbled by the response. He hadn't played for recognition, for applause, or for anyone's approval. He had played because it was part of him, because the music had always been a piece of his soul. And now, without intention, he had shared it with the world. Children rushed forward, their laughter soft and full of excitement. They pressed their small hands against his, tugging gently at his sleeves. "That was amazing," one said. "You're incredible," said another. Their words, full of wonder and sincerity, made him chuckle softly. There was no pretense in their admiration, no filters, just raw, honest excitement. Their energy was contagious, and it spread to everyone in the room, making the moment feel even more alive. Adults approached him slowly, some with hesitant smiles, others with eyes wide and sparkling. "I had no idea," one said, voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You've hidden this talent for so long," whispered another. Their words were simple, yet heavy with meaning. They realized now that the quiet man they had known for years had a depth they had never seen before. He had been ordinary in appearance, unassuming in manner, yet he possessed something extraordinary, something that could move hearts with a few touches of the keys. The man stood, brushing off his sleeves, still smiling quietly. He didn't seek attention, didn't bask in the praise, but the gratitude in the room was palpable. People wanted to express what they felt, to let him know how much the performance had touched them. The piano, which had been silent and forgotten moments ago, now seemed like a bridge connecting everyone in the room. It had transformed a simple morning into an experience that would linger in memory for years. A visitor, unable to contain curiosity, asked gently, "How long have you been playing like this?" The man hesitated, then chuckled softly. "I've played for many years," he said. "I never had the chance or maybe the courage to play in front of anyone. Music has always been personal, something private. Today, I just felt like it wanted to be shared." His words were calm, humble, but they carried weight. They revealed the quiet dedication, the years of unseen practice, and the love for music that had been waiting for a moment like this. The children clustered around him again, their voices soft but insistent. "Why didn't you ever play for us before?" one asked. Another added, "You're amazing. You should play all the time." He smiled at them, a warmth in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said, "we keep some things for ourselves. But today the piano called to me, and I felt it was time to let it speak." The simplicity of his explanation, coupled with the honesty, made everyone feel connected, not just to the music, but to him as a person. Guests and family members exchanged glances, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. They had witnessed something rare. It wasn't just a performance. It was a revelation. It was a reminder that people often carry hidden talents, quiet passions, and abilities that go unnoticed until the right moment arrives. They realized that extraordinary things can come from ordinary people in ordinary places without fanfare or expectation. The melody shifted. What had begun as a soft, careful tune grew bolder. The notes began to flow faster, intertwining with each other, yet never losing clarity. It was as though the man and the piano were speaking together in a language that only music could express. There was a confidence in the way he played now, a freedom in each movement that was breathtaking. The room seemed to expand around him, the walls fading away as the sound grew more vivid, more expressive. Every person in the room felt it differently. Some were reminded of memories long past, moments they had almost forgotten, but that now came rushing back with the rhythm of the music. Others felt joy, a warm, spreading feeling in their chest that made them smile without realizing it. A few felt a bittersweet ache, a quiet sadness touched by beauty, carried through the gentle rise and fall of the notes. The music reached into everyone's heart, connecting them without a single word. The children were leaning closer, their small hands gripping the edge of the piano. They whispered again, barely audible, but their voices carried a sense of wonder. It's like he's telling a story. Yeah, replied the other. I can feel it. I can feel it in my chest. Their innocence and honesty made the moment feel even more magical, reminding the adults of the pure way music can touch someone without explanation. The man's hands moved faster now, yet there was no rush, no frantic energy. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and natural. The melody became more complex, a series of flowing patterns that seemed almost impossible to play, yet he did it effortlessly. Each chord and scale moved smoothly into the next, weaving a story that was at once exciting, emotional, and beautiful. The music wasn't just notes, it was an expression of years of experience. Practice and silent dedication, now revealed in the most unexpected moment. The guests in the room couldn't help themselves. They leaned closer, trying to see how someone could do what seemed impossible. They exchanged glances, eyes wide with astonishment, shaking their heads in disbelief. I can't believe it, one whispered. I had no idea, said another. Their words were filled with awe and respect. The man had been quiet, unassuming, a part of their everyday life, yet here he was, demonstrating a depth of talent that no one had expected. The melody shifted again, growing softer now, more introspective. The fast-flowing sequences gave way to gentle, lingering notes that seemed to float in the air. Each note was held just long enough to resonate fully, to touch the soul of anyone listening. It was a quieter section, but no less powerful. In fact, it felt almost more intimate, as though the piano was speaking directly to each person one by one. The children leaned forward, faces close to the piano, captivated by the emotion, their eyes reflecting the music in a way that words could not. Adults, too, felt themselves drawn in. They leaned back slightly, letting the music wash over them. Some closed their eyes, surrendering to the beauty and complexity of the sound. Others simply listened in awe, heads tilted, mouths slightly open, unable to fully process the skill and emotion they were witnessing. The room, ordinary only minutes ago, had been transformed. It was no longer a simple living space. It had become a small concert hall, filled with wonder and shared experience. The man added subtle flourishes to the melody. Small decorations in the music that brought new life to familiar patterns. Delicate trills, gentle runs across the keys, soft harmonies, added depth, each added emotion. The audience could feel the passion behind every movement. The quiet joy of someone finally expressing what they had kept inside for so long. The music became a bridge between him and everyone else. A shared connection that transcended words, transcended age, and transcended expectation. Even the children whispered again, unable to contain themselves. It's like magic. Yeah, said the other, their voice filled with excitement and awe. Their innocence and honesty reminded the adults that this was more than just a performance, it was a revelation. The man, once quiet and unnoticed, had suddenly become the center of attention. Not through showmanship, but through pure, undeniable talent. The music grew in intensity once more. Fast, complex passages interwove with slower, more emotional sections, creating a dynamic contrast that held everyone's attention. The man's hands moved with incredible precision and speed, yet each note was deliberate, each chord carefully placed. The melody told a story, a journey moving through peaks and valleys of emotion. Listeners felt themselves carried along, swept up in the tide of sound that seemed endless. Yet perfectly controlled, the audience could see the focus in his eyes, the slight furrow in his brow. The way he leaned into the piano, fully immersed in the music. It was not a performance for applause or recognition. It was music for the sake of music, for the sake of expression. And that honesty, that sincerity, made it all the more powerful. Everyone in the room could feel it. The beauty of the music was not just in the notes, but in the truth behind them. As the melody shifted again, moving into a more reflective, slower section, a hush fell over the room. Even the subtle sounds of the house had faded completely. The children held their breath, leaning closer, almost afraid to blink. The adults listened in silence, captivated. The room seemed to vibrate with emotion, each note leaving an invisible trace that touched every heart in the space. It was a reminder that talent could exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The man played with his eyes closed now, lost entirely in the music. His fingers moved instinctively, guided by years of hidden practice, passion, and dedication. Each chord, each pause, each delicate run was perfect in its timing and placement. The melody had grown beyond something simple or easy. It was complex, emotional, and breathtaking. Yet he made it look effortless, as though the music had always belonged to him. He was merely letting it speak. The children whispered once more, their voices full of wonder. "It's like it's telling a story." "Yeah, I can feel it." Their honesty reminded the adults in the room of the purity of music, of how it could touch anyone, regardless of age or understanding. The adults nodded silently, eyes wide, fully immersed in the experience. There were no distractions, no interruptions. Just the music and the connection it created. The melody began to build again, rising to a gentle, emotional climax. Notes flowed faster now, chords harmonized beautifully, and the rhythm created a sense of anticipation. The audience felt their hearts race in time with the music, swept up in the skill and passion of the man at the piano. It was no longer just music, it was a shared journey. A moment that united everyone in the room through sound and emotion. He played with quiet intensity, never rushing, never forcing, allowing the music to flow naturally. The piano responded to every movement, every touch, creating a sound that was both powerful and delicate. The melody soared, filled with energy and emotion, carrying everyone along in its current. Listeners felt the highs and lows, the joy and reflection, as if the music were telling their own stories, their own feelings. Without a single word, the room had become a sanctuary of sound. Children leaned closer, captivated, whispering soft comments. Adults listened in awe, completely absorbed. Guests who had arrived casually, expecting nothing remarkable, now felt the weight and beauty of talent revealed in the most unexpected way. It was a reminder that extraordinary abilities can exist quietly, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As the final section of the melody approached, the man's hands moved with confidence, every note deliberate, every chord meaningful. The music flowed naturally, rising and falling, building anticipation, and finally settling into a gentle, lingering finish. The audience felt a mixture of awe, admiration, and quiet emotion. The room had been transformed, the ordinary morning replaced by something extraordinary, and no one would ever forget it. The final notes hung in the air, slowly fading, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than before. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that presses gently against your chest, that makes you take a deeper breath. As if the room itself had paused to absorb everything that had just happened. Everyone sat still for a moment, unsure if they should speak, move, or even blink, afraid to disturb the magic that had unfolded before them. The piano, once dusty and forgotten, now stood as a quiet witness to something extraordinary, something no one had expected. The man leaned back slightly, fingers hovering over the keys for just a moment longer, as if reluctant to break the connection. He opened his eyes and looked around the room. The expressions he saw were a mixture of shock, awe, and quiet admiration. Faces that had been casual and distracted earlier were now full of emotion. Guests and family alike had been touched in ways they couldn't even fully describe. Some smiled softly, eyes glistening, while others just sat quietly, heads tilted slightly, still caught in the spell of the music. He didn't notice the audience anymore. He was lost in the music, his mind and heart fully engaged with the piano. Every note that came out of the keys felt natural, as though it had always existed inside him, waiting only for the right moment to be expressed. He tilted his head slightly, eyes closing for a brief second, as if listening to a conversation only he could hear. The room had become a stage, though it wasn't planned or intended. It was simply a space where music could be felt, shared, and admired. The children whispered to each other, voices barely audible. "It's amazing. I didn't know he could play like that. Never heard anything like this." Their small, innocent wonder added a gentle hum of excitement to the room, blending with the rich notes flowing from the piano. Even the guests who had been skeptical before now found themselves leaning in, fully attentive. The atmosphere was different. It felt sacred, almost magical. Something had awakened in the ordinary living room that no one could have predicted. The man's fingers flew across the keys now, not rushed, but with a natural speed that amazed everyone watching. Complex chords, intricate melodies, and subtle harmonies emerged effortlessly. It was clear that this wasn't the work of someone who had just learned a few songs. This was mastery, honed quietly over years, now being revealed to the world for the first time. Each note resonated in the room, was vibrating in the air and in the hearts of those who listened. The guests began to glance at each other, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. They whispered, trying to share their amazement without interrupting the performance. "He's incredible," one said softly. "How did we never know?" asked another. Their words were small, yet they carried the awe and disbelief everyone felt. This wasn't just talent. It was something rare, something extraordinary that had remained hidden for far too long. The children, completely absorbed, leaned against the piano for a better view. Their small hands clutched the edge of the bench, eyes fixed on the man's fingers moving with precision. Every flourish, every delicate pause, every powerful chord was noticed. They could feel the emotion in the music, even if they didn't understand the technical skill behind it. The melody had a way of speaking directly to the heart, bypassing the need for explanation or understanding. As the music swelled, so did the emotions in the room. Some people felt a sense of nostalgia, memories surfacing as they listened to the expressive notes. Others felt joy, a warmth spreading through their chest, making them smile softly without realizing it. Even those who had arrived with skepticism found themselves captivated, unable to think of anything else but the sound that filled the space. The piano, once an object in the corner of the room, had become the center of attention, a voice that everyone wanted to hear. The man's hands moved with such ease that it almost seemed as though he wasn't thinking at all. The music was instinctive, flowing naturally, and yet it was precise and deliberate. There was a rhythm and pattern that made each note meaningful. The melody rose and fell like waves, gentle at times, strong at others, but always beautiful. Each chord, each note was perfectly placed, creating a tapestry of sound that enveloped the listeners in emotion. No one wanted to interrupt the flow. The room was completely silent except for the piano. Even the small sounds of life, the children shifting slightly, the faint movement of a chair, the quiet breathing of the audience were barely noticeable. It was as if time had slowed down, allowing the music to take over completely. The melody was powerful, yet gentle, commanding attention without demanding it. It was an expression of something deep, something personal, something that could only be shared through sound. The children leaned closer, their small faces illuminated with wonder. "He's so good," whispered one softly. Another nodded, eyes wide. "It feels magical." The adults exchanged quiet glances, sharing their amazement without words. Each person in the room was experiencing the music in their own way, yet all were united in a shared sense of awe. It wasn't just the technical skill that impressed them. It was the emotion, the depth, and the humanity in every note. The man continued, lost in the music, unaware of the growing attention. The melody had become more expressive, more intricate, and each note seemed to tell a story. There were moments of gentle reflection, pauses filled with emotion, followed by sudden bursts of energy that made the music come alive. It was impossible not to be drawn in, impossible to resist being moved by the sound. Guests and family members leaned in, trying to understand how someone could play with such depth and skill. "I've never heard anything like this," one whispered. "It's beautiful," said another. The words were inadequate. Yet they were the only way to express the overwhelming feeling of watching a hidden talent finally come to life. The melody shifted again, becoming even more complex. Fast, delicate notes interwove with slower, more reflective ones. Each transition was seamless, a smooth flow that made the music feel alive, breathing, evolving in real time. The man's fingers moved like they had a mind of their own, guided by years of unseen practice, passion, and dedication. Every note had a purpose, every pause a meaning. It was impossible to look away. It's impossible not to be captivated by the artistry unfolding in front of them. Even the children were entranced. Their eyes followed every movement of his hands, their small mouths slightly open in wonder. They whispered quietly to each other, barely audible. "It's like the piano is talking to us," said one, and replied another. "It's like he's telling a story with it." Their innocence added a quiet beauty to the room, a reminder that music could touch anyone, regardless of age or experience. The adults were equally moved. Some leaned back in their chairs, heads tilted, completely absorbed. Others rested their chins in their hands, unable to focus on anything else. Whispers of admiration continued, though no one wanted to break the spell. "I can't believe I didn't know he could play like this," someone said softly. The words hung in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the surprise and wonder everyone felt. The man, still focused on the piano, added small flourishes to the melody. Delicate arpeggios, subtle changes in tempo, and expressive chords brought new layers to the music. It was no longer just a song. It was a story unfolding in real time. The melody rose and fell, building anticipation and releasing it, carrying everyone in the room along with it. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful, creating a performance that was both intimate and powerful. As the music reached another gentle climax, the audience felt a collective shiver of awe. The piano's voice seemed to speak directly to them, expressing emotions they could feel but not always articulate. It was a reminder that talent could exist quietly, patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The man's quiet morning, which had begun with a simple act of cleaning, transformed into something extraordinary, a shared experience that no one in the room would forget. Even as the notes softened and the melody took on a more reflective tone, the attention in the room remained fixed. No one wanted the moment to end. The children leaned closer, captivated. The adults sat quietly, taking in every sound.
Each note
Carried weight, each pause brought anticipation, and the music continued to flow effortlessly from the man's fingers. And as the final section of the melody began to fade, the audience felt a mixture of awe, joy, and quiet reverence. The room had been transformed from a place of ordinary morning routines into a space of beauty, emotion, and connection. The piano, once forgotten and dusty, had become a vessel for something far greater than anyone could have expected. The room felt alive in a way it never had before. The first few seconds of music had been a surprise, a quiet awakening, but now it was something more. Each note that came from the piano seemed to expand, filling every corner of the room, brushing against the walls and echoing softly in the hearts of those who listened. People didn't move. They didn't speak. Even the small noises of daily life, the subtle creaks of the house, or the distant chirping of birds outside, were drowned out by the presence of the music. It was impossible to ignore. The children, still leaning against the piano, were spellbound. Their wide eyes followed every subtle movement of his fingers. Even though they didn't know much about music, they could feel it. The energy, the emotion, the passion behind each note, it reached them without explanation. They whispered to each other softly, barely audible. "It's amazing. I didn't know he could play like this." Their words didn't disrupt the moment. Instead, they became part of the quiet awe that filled the room. Adults in the house were just as captivated. Some had their hands clasped, resting on their knees, while others leaned slightly forward, trying to take in every note. A soft murmur ran through the crowd, a quiet acknowledgement of what they were witnessing. "I never imagined." Someone began but trailed off because there were no words that could describe what was happening. It wasn't just the technical skill, they could sense the emotion behind it, the years of practice, and the love for music that had been hidden until now. As the melody continued, it began to evolve. The notes flowed smoothly, weaving together in patterns that were both unexpected and comforting. There was a rhythm to it, gentle yet insistent, like the quiet heartbeat of the morning itself. Chord resonated deeply, vibrating through the wooden floor and into the hearts of everyone listening. The music was alive, moving through the room. It carried with it a sense of emotion that words could never capture. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt the moment. Even the small sounds of the house seemed to hold their breath, but the children leaned closer, pressing their small hands to their mouths in awe. Guests stopped mid-conversation, frozen by the unexpected performance. The family exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that something extraordinary was unfolding. This was no ordinary music, no casual tinkering at a piano. This was talent, hidden and patient, finally stepping into the light. His fingers moved with surprising agility, dancing over the keys with a grace that seemed effortless. The melody grew richer, more complex, yet it never lost its warmth or its clarity. There was an emotional depth to it, a kind of quiet storytelling that drew each listener in. It was not about showing off skill, it was about expressing something deep, something personal that could only be shared through music. The room felt different now. It was no longer just a living room filled with ordinary morning routines. It had transformed into a space where magic seemed possible, where something unseen and unexpected could suddenly command attention. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed warmer, the dust particles now sparkling like tiny stars in the air. Even the piano, once forgotten and covered in dust, now gleamed as if it had been waiting for this very moment to shine. He continued playing, allowing the music to flow naturally. The melody had a life of its own, rising and falling in gentle waves, sometimes soft and introspective, sometimes strong and confident. The notes carried emotion, a blend of joy, nostalgia, and quiet reflection. Each person in the room felt it differently, yet all felt it deeply. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others simply sat still, mesmerized by the unexpected beauty unfolding before them. As the music progressed, he added subtle variations to the melody, small flourishes that showed both skill and emotion. His hands moved almost instinctively, guided by years of practice that no one had ever seen. The complexity of the music increased, yet it never felt forced or overdone. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was as if the piano and the man were communicating silently, creating something that was greater than the sum of its parts. The children whispered to each other in amazement. "Did you hear that?" I'd asked softly. "He's really good." The words were barely audible, yet they carried the awe that everyone in the room was feeling. The visitors exchanged silent nods, equally stunned. No one had expected this. It was one thing to clean a piano. It was another to suddenly transform it into an instrument that could captivate everyone in the room with a few seconds of playing. He didn't notice the growing attention. His focus was entirely on the music, on letting it flow naturally from his fingers. There was a calm determination in his expression, a quiet joy that came from doing something he loved, something that had been a part of him for years, but had rarely been shared. The room around him seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of the piano and the emotions it carried. Some of the guests, unable to contain their curiosity, began to inch closer, drawn by the beauty of the sound. Each step they took was cautious, as if they did not want to disturb the fragile magic of the moment. The children leaned on the backs of chairs to get a better view, their eyes wide and sparkling with wonder. Even the family members, who had seen him every day and thought they knew him, were discovering a side of him they had never imagined. The music continued to build, growing richer and more expressive with each passing moment. The notes flowed seamlessly, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and deeply moving. There was a natural rhythm to it, a balance between simplicity and complexity that made it impossible to look away. Each chord resonated not just in the room, but in the hearts of everyone listening. As the melody reached a particularly moving section, a subtle silence fell over the room. Even the sounds of the house seemed to pause, allowing the music to take center stage. The man's hands moved with precision and grace, bringing out the emotion in each note. There was a sense of intimacy in the performance, as if he were sharing a personal story with each person present, a story told not through words, but through music. The audience could feel the emotion in every chord. Some felt a quiet sadness, a longing for something lost or remembered. Others felt joy, a warmth that spread through the chest and made them smile without realizing it. The music seemed to speak directly to each person, connecting them through a shared experience that was both unexpected and unforgettable. No one wanted the moment to end. The melody continued to evolve, each note carefully chosen, each pause perfectly timed. The man played with a quiet intensity, fully absorbed in the music, unaware of the astonished faces around him. The piano, which had once been just a piece of furniture, had become a voice, a storyteller, and a bridge between his hidden talent and the people who were witnessing it for the first time. Time seemed to stretch and bend around the music. Minutes felt like seconds, and the ordinary morning had transformed into an extraordinary experience. Everyone in the room was fully present, caught in the spell of the melody. Life, the dishes clinking in the kitchen, the low murmur of conversation. The distant hum of traffic outside faded into the background, leaving only the piano and the story it was telling. As he played, small details became apparent. The way his fingers moved over the keys with ease, the subtle shifts in tempo and intensity. The emotional depth behind each note all revealed a mastery that had been hidden for years. It was clear that this was not a casual player, not someone experimenting or playing for fun. This was someone who had devoted time, patience, and passion to their craft. And now, for the first time, that dedication was visible to everyone around him. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy of the performance. Children leaned closer, their eyes bright and filled with wonder. Adults watched in silent amazement, unable to tear their gaze away from the piano. Even those who had been skeptical or distracted before now found themselves completely captivated. The ordinary morning had become a shared experience of awe and admiration, and no one could have predicted it. As the melody reached a gentle climax, he allowed himself a small smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection he had created with the room. The music was no longer just his own, it belonged to everyone who had stopped to listen, to everyone who had been touched by the unexpected beauty of the moment. It was a shared experience, a reminder that talent can exist quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And even as the final notes of this section lingered in the air, soft and fading, there was a sense that this was only the beginning. The morning, once ordinary and predictable, had been transformed into something remarkable. The piano, cleaned and cared for, had become a portal to a hidden world of talent and emotion. And the man who had seemed so quiet and unassuming had become the center of attention, commanding respect and admiration, with nothing more than his music and his quiet presence. The room was silent now, filled only with the sound of the piano and the quiet hum of anticipation. The man's hands moved over the keys with a confidence that had grown since the first tentative note. Each chord he played carried emotion, a story in itself, and it was impossible for anyone to look away. The melody had evolved, becoming more intricate, more alive, as if it had taken on a life of its own. The children, who had been standing close to the piano, were now completely still. Their eyes followed every movement of his hands. They didn't speak, afraid to break the magic of the moment, but their wide-eyed amazement said everything. Each note seemed to tell them something new, something bigger than what they had ever heard before. It was no longer just music. It was a message, a feeling, something that reached into their hearts and refused to let go. Adults in the room were just as captivated. Some leaned forward in their chairs, unable to sit still. Others rested their elbows on their knees, their heads tilted slightly as they absorbed every sound. Whispers of awe floated through the room, though no one wanted to disturb the music. "I didn't know he could play like this," someone murmured softly, almost in disbelief. Another guest shook their head, eyes wide. "I never imagined." Their sentences trailed off because words could not capture what was happening. The melody grew in intensity. The soft, delicate notes were replaced with a flowing stream of sound that filled every corner of the room. The piano seemed to speak now, not just through the man's hands, but as if it had always had a voice waiting to be heard. The rhythm shifted, sometimes quick and lively, sometimes slow and reflective. Every change was seamless, as if the music was alive and breathing, guiding the fingers that played it. The morning sunlight streamed softly through the windows, casting a gentle glow on the living room. Dust particles danced lazily in the warm beams as if they were tiny sparks of life floating in the air. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional chirping of birds outside. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed ordinary, calm, and almost predictable. People moved about their routines, each lost in their little worlds, completely unaware that something unexpected was about to happen. In the corner of the room, near the window, stood a piano. It wasn't new or shiny. Its wooden frame had small scratches, and the keys had dulled slightly with age. There was a layer of dust on its surface, the kind of dust that settled over months, untouched, almost forgotten. The piano had once been a centerpiece of the house, a source of music and laughter. But now it sat quietly, waiting for a moment it might never have. Its presence was unassuming, blending into the background as the family went about their day. The man who lived in the house noticed the piano. As he walked by with a cloth in his hand, he was a quiet person, the kind who didn't draw attention to himself. His face carried a calm, thoughtful expression. His movements were deliberate, slow, as if he measured each step before taking it. He paused for a moment, looking at the piano, running his fingers lightly over the dust-covered top. There was no fanfare in his eyes, no anticipation, only a quiet recognition of the instrument before him. With a soft sigh, he knelt down and began wiping the piano. The cloth moved carefully over the surface, tracing the edges, polishing the worn wood. He wiped the keys gently, removing the dust that had settled over time. Each key, black and white, gleamed faintly under his touch. There was a rhythm to the cleaning, a methodical flow that made the task seem less like a chore and more like a quiet ritual. The sound of the cloth brushing against the keys was soft, barely audible, but it added a subtle rhythm to the otherwise still morning around him. The house carried on its ordinary life. In the kitchen, someone hummed a tune as they prepared breakfast. The smell of toast and coffee drifted into the living room, mingling with the faint scent of the dust being cleared from the piano. The atmosphere was comfortable, ordinary, and warm. No one imagined that this calm morning was about to be interrupted by something extraordinary. As he continued to clean, he straightened slightly and glanced out the window. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. The world outside seemed peaceful, the kind of peace that made you forget the rush of everyday life. For a moment, he allowed himself to pause, enjoying the quiet beauty around him. But then his eyes returned to the piano, and he began moving again, polishing the wood with patient care. There was a sense of reverence in the way he worked, a respect for something that had been a part of his life long ago. The family members moved in and out of the room, going about their routines. A child ran past, laughing and calling for someone in the kitchen. The sound of small feet on the wooden floor echoed softly, blending with the faint hum of life. Guests had arrived the previous day and were still lingering, chatting quietly on the sofas. Conversations continued in low tones, completely unaware of the quiet moment unfolding in the corner with the piano. He took a deep breath and continued cleaning, his hands steady and deliberate. There was a rhythm to his movements, almost like a silent dance between him and the instrument. He wiped down the keys once more, making sure every inch was free of dust. There was something almost meditative in the task, a peaceful focus that made the world outside fade away. He was alone with the piano, and in that solitude, it was a quiet anticipation, though even he did not realize it yet. Time seemed to slow down as he worked. Each stroke of the cloth, each careful movement over the keys, carried a sense of care and precision. He leaned back slightly and ran his hands over the keys once more, pressing lightly to feel their texture. They felt familiar under his fingers, each key responding with a small, subtle sound as if acknowledging his touch. He smiled faintly, a small expression of contentment. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet appreciation for the simple act of caring for something meaningful. In the background, life continued around him. Voices rose and fell in conversation. Laughter occasionally broke through, and the sound of the kitchen utensils clinking added a faint rhythm to the air. Yet, in the midst of it all, he remained focused on the piano, oblivious to the world, as if the room itself had paused in recognition of the quiet dedication before it. The piano, long forgotten and covered in dust, now seemed to awaken under his care. Its surface gleamed faintly, and its keys, once dulled, now shone with a subtle brightness, ready to create music once more as he finished wiping the final layer of dust. He leaned back slightly and studied the piano. His fingers lingered over the keys, not yet pressing them, but hovering as if testing the air, feeling the potential for sound and expression. It was a quiet moment, but within it lay a sense of possibility. Something extraordinary was about to unfold, even if no one in the room realized it yet. The children, now noticing the man at the piano, paused in their games. Their curiosity was piqued by the attention he was giving to the instrument. They watched silently, sensing that something different was about to happen, though they could not put it into words. The guests, too, glanced over occasionally, intrigued by the careful movements and the focused expression on his face. There was a subtle tension in the room, a quiet expectation that something unexpected might emerge. He straightened his back, placing the cloth aside, and took a seat on the piano bench. It was a simple action, almost casual, but it carried a weight that no one could yet understand. He adjusted his posture slightly, hands resting gently above the keys. For a moment, there was silence. The house seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the birds stopped chirping, and even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. And then, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to touch the keys. A soft note emerged, delicate and clear. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it had a certain purity that immediately drew attention. The man's eyes closed slightly as he pressed the next key, then the next. The music began slowly, carefully, each note measured and precise. It was as if the piano had been waiting for this moment. And now, under his fingers, it finally sang. The people in the room stopped what they were doing. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Footsteps froze, and even the children's laughter faded into quiet curiosity. All attention turned to the piano, where this simple, gentle sound began to fill the room. It was unexpected, surprising, and entirely captivating. The music, though soft, carried an invisible weight, a sense of emotion that touched everyone present. No one could have predicted this moment. The piano, once just a piece of furniture, had become the center of attention. The man who had been quiet and unassuming all morning now held the room's focus without saying a single word. Each note he played seemed to speak, telling a story without needing explanation. The ordinary morning had transformed into something remarkable, something that would be remembered long after the sun had fully risen. And as the first melody began to take shape, the man continued to play, unaware of the astonished faces around him. He was lost in the music, in the rhythm of his fingers on the keys. The house, once ordinary and calm, was now alive with sound, and everyone could sense that something special was unfolding. The piano, cleaned and cared for that morning, had become more than just an instrument. It had become a voice, a storyteller, and the beginning of an unforgettable journey. The first note lingered in the air, soft and delicate, like a whisper carried on a gentle breeze. For a moment, no one moved. The ordinary sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint footsteps of children, the chatter in the kitchen seemed to fade away. All attention was drawn to the piano, where his fingers hovered lightly above the keys. Ready to bring life to something that had been silent for so long, he began again, this time with a little more confidence. The melody was simple, yet precise. Each note was clear, each movement intentional. It was not flashy or showy, but there was something pure about the sound, something that touched the soul in a way words never could. It was as if the music had its own voice, speaking directly to everyone in the room, telling them a story without using a single word. The people nearby felt it immediately. A visitor, leaning casually on the sofa, straightened and leaned forward, drawn by the beauty of the sound. Children stopped their games and tiptoed closer, their eyes wide with curiosity. Even the family members who had seen him every day were caught off guard. They had known him as a quiet, reserved person, the kind who rarely drew attention. And yet here he was, producing music that seemed to fill the room with life.